everyone. Thanks for being with CFI this morning as we connect the dots with Dr. Food on this first day of August. It's starting to seem like we're doing this weekly instead of monthly. The time is flying so quickly this summer. I'm Mickie French. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Food Integrity. Our sole mission is to build trust in the food system, and we envision a world where consumer expectations align with practices in the food system to build trust and transparency. If you haven't already heard, from one way or another, we are hosting a transparency summit in October here in Chicago. So please go to foodintegrity.org, take a look, sign up, and join us. It'll be a great couple of days. So as usual, we are tapping into our vast network of contacts and people who help us to build trust in food, like no one better than Dr. David Hughes, also known as Dr. Food. So David has decades of experience in the food and drink industry, currently lives in Wales. And what's fascinating to me is that your son runs a pub on your side of the pond. And so you get to see firsthand the views of the restaurant industry.
Absolutely. So, yeah, he's got a pub, a fish and chip shop, a restaurant. He is into this, and I was down with him this weekend because he put on a ale and cider festival, and I had an important role in that, which, as I understood it, was talking to his customers and drinking. And I did both well, as far as I understood.
I'm sure you did. I wish I had been there to join you. So fine European hospitality heading into this month of holidays for all of you. So we are live this morning, so we're happy to encourage questions in the chat. So please, if there's anything that sparks a question, leave us a message in the chat and we'll try to get to it at the end. So our first topic relates to another place that you've recently traveled, and one of my very favorites, Italy. We know olive oil is a special and sacred crop over in Italy. So tell us why the olive oil is scarce and expensive this year.
Right. Yes, you're right. So me and the family, the extended family, spent a week in Italy. We were in Puglia, which is deep south Italy. It's on the, as we call it, the heel of Italy, just on the Mediterranean. And it was hot. It was 100 degrees Fahrenheit and very, very dry. And olive oil production in this region is hugely important. It accounts for 50% of total Italian olive oil production. And but by the by, Italy isn't the biggest producer globally. Actually, Spain is substantially bigger, but it goes Spain, then Italy, Greece, and then all the other Mediterranean countries. And as you mentioned, I mean, global olive oil prices actually have gone through the roof. I was just checking pre-COVID, just immediately pre-COVID, so 4 years back, they were at $2,500 per metric ton for olive oil, and now they're 4 times that. They were up to 10 grand per metric ton. They've just gone off a little from there. What's all that about? And frankly, I think Mickie, there's 2 principal reasons, but let me give you the Italian one first. A decade ago in Italy, disease struck the olive groves, and a fungus devastated and is devastating the groves, and is causing these wonderful hundreds of years old trees. They look fantastic, but they're dying. It's shocking to see, actually. So you get these magnificent trees, and which have been around for 300 years plus in some cases, and they are either dead or they are dying. It's extraordinarily sad to see. Take a long time. But there's an intriguing US agricultural link here. The Italians are using sniffer dogs to see which trees have the nasty disease. They can't cure it, but if the dogs sniff out trees which are just starting to get disease, then you can destroy that tree so it doesn't infect the others. Where did the technique come from? Well, it came from California and Florida, where your scientists train dogs to sniff out the devastating citrus greening disease. By the by, and on we go here, in European supermarkets, extra virgin olive oil is 6 times the price of premium vegetable oil like canola. And that's led to all sorts of adverse consequences, not such as, for example, food fraud in the olive oil sector, which has always been a difficult thing, but it's even more noted now, and it's at its highest level. Uh, so, in fact, last week I was just checking the news that where we were in Italy, in Puglia, that the Italian police in the small town where we were staying seized over $1 million of fake olive oil. So, it's a big deal for consumers and everybody. But so adding to this disease issue, of course, is that there's a huge drought issue in the Mediterranean, and olive yields in the groves, in the healthy groves, that is way down. And the result of that is those very high prices, and you're not about to see them coming down for long.
Wow. Italy without olive oil is not a world I want to see. And that food fraud is really, it really undermines consumer trust in some of the work that we're doing on source of origin. Be interesting to see if we can apply that to some of the olive grove issues. So thank you for that. Our next topic is about the troubles with another sacred food item, one of my favorites, European wine. So what trends are impacting this important part of the EU's economy?
Right. Yes, wine worries, as you say. And the EU wine industry has huge worries, and it's asking EU governments to come to the rescue. So what's the background here? Look, France, Italy, and Spain, the threesome, are the world's largest wine exporters, and they account for the better part of 60% of the total global wine market. That's huge. And EU consumers are great, as you'll know, are great wine consumers, or have been in history, and they polish off roughly half of the total global wine that is up there for human consumption. And wine contributes, what I think it's about in US dollars, 140 billion plus to EU gross domestic product. So it's a big deal. So what's the issue here? Well, European wine consumption is at its lowest level in 30 years. And exports, particularly of red wine, are really struggling. So why would that be? Well, they're being replaced. So European wines, particularly red, are being replaced by fresher, lighter wines from, not least, South America, for example, Chile. And it's especially younger consumers who are, moving away from European heavy wines. And also, there's a cultural shift underway towards other drinks. For example, non-alcoholic drinks are doing extraordinarily well, just in general. But if I take something specifically, what about drinks with CBD? And I can never quite get this correct. Is it come on, David? Cannabinoid, those with cannabinoids in them. This type of drink is seen as being hangover free, gives you a little bit of a buzz, but it's hangover free, and it's becoming very popular. And anyway, actually, more controversially perhaps, many countries in Europe have legislation to deregulate or to decriminalize cannabis. And that's had an adverse effect on wine sales. And another factor, which is not consumer related so much, it's the EU wine industry are very worried about geopolitical instability. And specifically, actually, it relates to China. In the EU, we saw what happened to Australian wine exports to China when the Prime Minister of Australia fell out with President Xi of China, and he popped on 300% tariffs on Australian wine exports to China, and essentially that just pushed Australian wine out of the market. That was a drop of exports of $1 billion plus. And they're concerned in the EU because actually we're having a difficult time with China, who isn't, frankly, and they're saying, what if push came to shove, this could happen to us. And mind you, you've got a big election coming up, and there's a concern that if you went more sort of less global and looked more towards your own domestic market, there may be upwards movement of your own tariffs. So what have the EU government been asked to do, and actually have done? Last year, the government allowed temporary crisis distillation to remove wine from the market. And which is, for me, it just reminds me of what happened back in 2007 when we had wine lakes. And so we were allowed to, or the industry was allowed to take wine and to sort of boil it up to remove wine from the market and turn excess wine into industrial alcohol. I might say, Mickey, that if Europe is drinking less wine in Westfield, the Parade, where I live, I don't see that happening. We're still trying to do our bit for European wine consumers. But it's a big deal for European wine guys, and they're much troubled by it.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you for that. Our third topic today is one I'm hearing bubble back up. It comes and goes as far as the terminology being used about agriculture, and that's regenerative ag. Um, Sometimes as food inflation goes up, as we've spoken in the past, some of the regenerative agriculture and sustainability issues get put off to the side. But it sounds like this is back on food companies' agendas. So tell us about the research that you've seen coming out of the EU on consumers' understanding of regenerative agriculture.
Right. It's an important study. Actually, I've shipped it over to you, Mickey. So if people really want to have a read of it, then they can get it through you, I'm sure. It's a comprehensive study on how European consumers perceive regenerative ag. And the big takeaways are, first of all, consumers don't see the need to transform agriculture in Europe. They're quite comfortable with conventional farming. In fact, believe it or not, they don't think too much about how their food is grown, with the exception that they're often worried about pesticides and food safety. But if they're prompted to compare conventional with regen ag, then conventional ag becomes less idyllic and less romantic in their mind's eye. I mean, actually, most European consumers don't know, or they just tend to guess about what regen ag is, and they confuse it directly with organic. They think they're roughly the same. With consumers, they see it. If they've got a view, it would be, isn't it good for the soil? And doesn't it's and they don't believe it's just a marketing gimmick, which is good. With consumers, the best triggers to promote approval, if you will, for them to embrace regen ag, is to talk about how it can improve taste, that it brings out healthy food, and maybe even more concentrated flavor and nutrient density. But confusion does relate to regen ag being healthier because it's without pesticide use, and that just isn't true. And in regen ag, you just use less pesticides. And they see that it's particularly relevant to fresh fruit and veg. They don't think regen ag has anything to do with big arable crops like cereals, corn, and the like. And what's more, and it's problematic, is the misperception that the practice, regen ag, is only appropriate for small-scale farmers and locals, the local small guy, not big ag. And that certainly isn't the case. And they're also slightly concerned that it may mean higher food prices for them. From the report, the recommendations for the industry were that the first one just is commonsensical. Industry must tell a compelling story of the consumer benefits associated with regen ag. And while doing so, though, don't blame farmers who are currently conventional. And create a consumer-centric definition that resonates with consumers' values and concerns. Because right now, the terms, every time I see a definition of regen ag, it's highly technical, heavy on science, etc. Actually, in the UK, the US has a recognized pioneer visiting us, Gabe Brown. He's a farmer from North Dakota whose approach is gaining a lot of traction. He's working with one of the premium UK retailers, which is Waitrose, who are concerned about what's happening. They have only a 4% share of the grocery market, but they've got a 20% share of organics, and they're seeing organics just drift down. And in fact, overall, in the US, you guys spent 5 times more per person on organic foods than we do. So so in the UK, we spend $1 a week per person on organic food, whereas you guys spend $5.
Wow.
So there's much to be said here.
Yeah, a lot. Great. We have two questions. I'm going to start with the one that's in the chat from today, and then we have one from last week when we were recorded. Interesting question. Do you think the rising price of olive oil is prompting some to cook more with butter? Is that an opportunity? Dairy, perhaps?
Phew. Yeah, this must be somebody who's dairy positive, clearly. I don't note that. What I do see is people trading down to lower priced oils. And sometimes that is not in their health interests, frankly. So, at the margin, I can see butter doing, a little better. But I mean, butter prices are up anyway, too. But no, I think it's lower priced oils that are gaining the positives from that.
Okay. Thanks for that. The other question from last week was a viewer asked if there is concern or movement by Great British consumers towards sustainable packaging. And is the movement growing or staying stable?
Right. In a word, the answer is yes. And what's more, it's not just the UK; it's European countries right across the board. So the push for sustainable packaging is inexorable. It's growing hugely. If you are any sort of food company and your packaging is not recyclable or compostable, I think in the in the short term, you're in deep trouble. And I think it's especially true if you've got a premium product, because the expectation is part and parcel of being premium is that you're completely recyclable. You can't get away by saying, and you can take our package back to the supermarket and they'll recycle it for you, because nobody does that. It's nobody wants the bother. And the topic in the UK is heating up big time. There's going to be regulation associated with it. But intriguingly, Mickey, is the food industry wants to see this regulation, and they want to see it right across the park. So that it's a level playing field. I think the implication for you guys is if anybody exporting a packaged food product in the UK or to the EU, if you're not compliant with that, then there'll be trade issues about getting your product in. And that, not right now, but very shortly, that's coming. And I think it's coming really big time.
Well, that's really good to know. Thank you for that. So we're at time. However, I think that we've got a couple of tidbits that we spoke about earlier this week, namely a female prime minister.
Well, it's a female prime minister in Wales. We've got our own little government here. Actually, we call them our first minister, and we've got a new one this week. She's our first female first minister, and she was before, formerly she was Minister of Health. So what? Well, the food connection is obvious for me, and one of her first actions is going to ban free soft drink refills, which many consumers love. But it's one of a suite of actions that she'll bring in that are deemed HFSS, high fat, sugar, salt product related. And there's just big time I've talked about this before, big time regulations coming here, but she's going to start with those free drinks. So, make sure you put it to the top, because that's the only one you're going to have.
All righty. Well, that's all we've got time for again today. Thank you for joining us as we connect the dots in the food chain across the pond with Dr. Food. We'll be back September 5th after our Labor Day for our next opportunity to connect the dots. And again, this is just an example of bringing you some global trends and what's happening around the world. So, David, thank you again. Enjoy the month of August on your side of the world, and we'll see you 1st of September.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing you next, and I hope it's not too hot and muggy for you. Cheerio now. Lovely talking.
Bye-bye.